Hey, Frank. Okay, well, we are here. Let's see if I can text Frank. Um, Frank, you're live on Facebook. Text. Let's see if he gets that. What's going on, Frank? You have to connect your audio.
You got me?
Yes, I got you. What's going on?
I'm sitting in my recliner. George, I'm single now, so I can have a recliner.
Hey, listen, it's all good. You can have a recliner. It's all good. Listen, it's not a problem.
Like any woman I've ever been involved, mother, sister, wife, girlfriend, no recliner.
So now you have a recliner, and the world is better for it. Let's just say it. I mean, it's how's it going, Frank? How you doing?
Good, everything is good. I got the air conditioner on today, so
That's that's incredible. It's cold as hell over here. I mean, it's not super cold, but it is cold and super gray. My glasses are fogging up. So
I, I
anyway,
I've been there. I've been there.
yeah,
Many
yeah, yeah,
cold
yeah,
New
yeah.
York winters.
So listen, we are live on Facebook. We have a bunch of people watching us.
Okay. I don't know
And
exactly how this works, but go on.
that's okay. This is all good. All we really need to do is talk about stuff. And that's what we're here for today. I see you wearing one of the awesome stuff t-shirts, which I need to get plenty of because I don't have one yet. Nevertheless, the reason why, let me just give you a little bit of reason of analysis and the reason why I wanted to have you on today. Um, Many years ago when we first met, I was doing Spring Awakening, and I think you came to watch the show one night, and then you were kind enough to give me a ride home. I was still living uptown, and we got to talking, and I think that was the first time we actually met.
Yeah,
Period. Right? In
2007, I think it was.
2007 exactly. And there was something that you said that stuck with me all this time, and at the time, of course, I had talked to you. I didn't know that you had been affiliated with the band Stuff, right? Um, but I talked to you about it, and since we were kind of talking about our backgrounds, our influences, and all that, and I brought up the fact that I'm a big fan of the various local recording entities, and as such, in New York, Stuff, in my opinion, was one of those bands that was comprised of mostly studio musicians and that did an incredible amount of work and had their own sound, right? And then lo and behold, you chimed in saying that, yeah, that was one of my biggest inspirations, and everybody else had their Jacos, they had their Stanley Clarks, you had Gordon Edwards, and he was just everything. He is just everything to you because he's still around, right?
Yeah.
And that stuck with me all these years, and I thought that number one, not only did it show like your commitment to the music and to that particular style of playing, but it in a more general sense, it sort of told me that it was okay to make a particular player your focus. It was okay. Like you can get a lot out of that, right? And it really helps your path or your creativity, or call it what you will. It just helps to be clear about it, and I think the way you presented it all these years ago was just very clear. There was no mistake about it. You liked Stuff, you liked Gordon Edwards. You ended up playing with the band many times. I ended up seeing you guys when Gordon was playing up at Creoles on East Harlem, 117th Street. So there was a lot of history there, and that kind of, I noticed that. So let's get into it. Oh, we got a lot of people saying hello. Eric Naslund, hello. Marco Panacea, hello. Bobby Brennan, what's going on? Um, why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction to Stuff and what it means, what they mean to you? Because I thought
Okay.
that meant that would be interesting to hear.
first of all, I just want to be clear about a couple things. Is that um, the band stuff. I was never the bass player in the band stuff.
Of
Gordon
course.
Edwards, whenever it's stuff,
Yeah.
it's Gordon. Now, a lot of time lately, in the past few years, when there's a stuff gig, and hopefully it's funny. The last one we did was Gordon's. I think it was his 82nd birthday. It was at the bitter end. It was almost a year.
Last.
It was usually in February. So
Yeah.
hopefully
Yeah.
we'll do a belated one, maybe in the summer or something like that.
Right.
But because I hear he's doing great. Um,
Excellent.
so whenever it's actually stuff, it's Gordon's band. But then he usually likes to play one set, and then in the band now is Roy Bennett, who's a great singer, bass player, drummer. So he does some numbers. And then fortunately, he usually asks me to play some numbers after that. So it's sort of that crowd of people. But
Right. Right. But stuff
I'm
as
never
a
the bass player in stuff.
right.
However, what happened, and then I'll get into the beginning of it, is that stuff I guess sort of broke up around 1982 or something like that. I know at one point, maybe in the late 70s, Cornell actually moved to California for a while.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and then when he returned, the band had kind of splintered into three groups, and then he
Hmm.
put together his own group, and eventually I became the bass player in that group. But what my original introduction to the band, I remember it was a March of '75. I'm hanging out. I remember I was hanging out with some friends that they had an apartment in West Beth, and what are we going to do tonight? I looked at New York Magazine and I see Mikell's. I had heard of the place, I'd never been there, and it had the Gordon Edwards Quintet, and it was
Nice.
Gordon Edwards, Cornell Dupree, Richard T., Chris Parker, and Charlie Brown was the
Mm.
sax player. And that seemed very interesting to me because I knew Chris Parker was very well. I had heard him at the Fillmore East with a country band he used to play with, and I had heard him with Butterfield quite a few times.
Mm.
I loved his playing,
Mm.
and then I knew I was particularly interested in Cornell because I had seen his name on a lot of records, but I didn't know what he actually sounded like, because it was always in the mix, and I couldn't, I just so we went up there, and it was completely it was life changing for me. It
Yeah.
was the I mean the feel was I'd never experienced that live before, and then with the bass player with Gordon, what he was doing, I'd been like studying jazz. I think at that point I was like seriously like a bebop
Hmm.
player,
Hmm.
and on electric at the time actually. But his feel, the note placement
Yeah.
was there were
Divine.
faces that I just didn't know existed in life. It's like if you're driving and there's a vista that's the most beautiful mountain. There's just things you just didn't even know exist. Like that space. It's like a drug thing. It's like the first time if you take a drug and you get a
Mm.
high, and it's like you never know you could feel that way in your life. You didn't know that feeling was available to you in life, right?
Fair
So
enough. Yeah.
that's what it was, and I just became, and then the way the whole thing fit together, and
Right.
the different feels and the different tempos, the choice of material, it was a cover band back then. It was a cover band until they got a record deal. So it was really like a cover band for 2 years, or
Right.
at least. And it was really just, they would play like pop tunes, and I
Right.
had a very, they would do their own thing on by the time I get to Phoenix, My Girl,
Signed, sealed, delivered.
Ode to Billy Joe,
Right.
stuff, so it was just pop tunes, and I had a definite feeling that, at the time I was beginning to play with the old beboppers, and all they talked about was what 52nd Street was like. I guess we're talking now like 30 years before that, 20,
Right.
in the 40s. And I knew I was 19 maybe, and I was like, when I'm an old man, I'm going to talk about this just like those guys talked about 52nd Street,
Right,
right? And
right.
here we are. So,
And here we are. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. 90. What was it? Mikell's was up on 97th Street, and
97th to Columbus. It was on the northwest corner. It's where Whole Foods is now.
yeah, I don't know if the building itself
No,
still it doesn't exist anymore,
no,
right?
no, no. It was there for a while. It was a diner for a long time, and
Right.
then when Whole Foods came in.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so I just started going there for a long time. Now there was a few other things that were. It was a bit of a scene. There were a couple of clubs around there, so it was like a little
Exactly.
bit of a scene. There was a place called Brody's, and they had live music. A place called Rust Brown's, they had live music. So there was like a scene, and it was a really integrated scene. I
Right.
mean, it was a real scene where I just felt like I was, you know, you know, experiencing this culture. Black culture was like coming down from Harlem, and R&B, and it was very comfortable. It
Yeah.
was very, I was young. I was very nervous. I didn't talk to hardly anybody for a long time,
Right.
but I was comfortable, and people were friendly, and it was, I mean,
It was a hang. It
yeah, I
was a
mean,
total hang. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
That
ask
that's
Chris would remember probably that, I was there a lot.
right, 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 right. Now, this the one thing that in the lead up to today's video, right? We talked a couple days ago, and the one thing that really struck me, and that I think what is important for the audience also to realize, is that the similarities between, say, an entity like the Funk Brothers and a group like Stuff,
Mm.
because all of the members, like, they had this hang at Mikell's where you experienced them. And we're gonna get to the music and to some more technical stuff in a little while. Nevertheless, I wanted to express to the audience that these were incredibly prolific musicians, right? This is really important to realize. Like, yes, they had this gig where they played, what was it, Tuesday to Saturday or something like that?
It was Sunday through Thursday. It was all the
Sunday.
weeknights, five
Okay.
nights a week, 10 to 3.
Okay. So Sunday to Thursday, 10 to 3 every week.
Every week for like 2 years.
Okay.
Occasionally there'd be another band there, but hardly, rarely, rarely.
Okay. Now they did that, and then in the morning, as you told me, they would be up at 9 o'clock in the studio, clocking in and recording, right? So there was an incredible workload that they took care of, right? And where they kind of, where I'm sure, I'm guessing, I'm a total different generation, but I'm guessing that, the nightclub music probably influenced the way they sounded in the studio, and the way the studio sounded probably influenced what they played in the nightclub, and there was a lot of cross pollination going on.
Periodic. There were producers would come to Mikell's and listen to them, and then, I mean, I wasn't on any of these sessions, but from what I can understand, it was basically, producers would show up there and then hire them and say, play that under this singer,
Right,
Gladys Knight,
right,
or
right,
whoever, David Ruffin,
right.
just do that with this guy on
Right,
this.
right, right, right. That actually, let me just tell the audience that whoever is watching, whoever is listening. By the way, let me just shout out Irio Farrell, good to see you. Ruben Rodriguez, good to see you. Thomas Maguire, good to see you. And I probably messed up your name, so I'm sorry about that. Thomas Maguire says hello, Frank Canino. Do you know the dude? I'm sure you do. Anyway, I just wanted to let the audience know that, as with every video, with every live video, I put together these playlists, and you can see links to the playlists in the description of the video, right? And this week we have one playlist that I put together, and then a second playlist that Frank Canino curated. This the one that Frank curated is entitled Gordon Edwards. So check it out. It's just a snapshot, really, of Gordon's studio recordings, right? There's a lot of
Yeah,
stuff.
I guess good for good reason. There's not all of them by any stretch of the imagination are on Spotify, but the
Exactly.
ones I found some great ones.
Yeah. So I just wanted to let the audience know to check out these playlists, because again, like, the playlists always go with these live videos, and it helps. Like, if you're really interested, here's the information. There's no way that you cannot find this stuff anymore, right? So, but going back to Mikell's, all right. So we are now, you're 19, going on 20. It's a night at Mikell's. The band is bopping. The place is packed. Um, I was wondering, because I never experienced.
No. Place not packed.
Not packed. Check that out. Okay.
It was not packed. There were many nights, and I remember Steve Gadd said this in an interview where he was asked about some of the greatest music he ever played, and he said, "Well, there were a lot of nights at Mikell's when there was no one in the place." Well, I probably was there, but
Yeah.
there were a few people there. As I said, the people that I really remember being there all the time was Larry Saltzman and Paul Schaefer.
Right.
Those dudes were there a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. Go ahead. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good point. So, audience there or not, but the music is just incredible, right? And this is like, my take on the stuff sound is like, it's the best way I can put it into words. It's, you're standing in front of a train, and the train is about to roll over you, and you're gonna enjoy every second of this fucking train rolling over you. It's gonna be the greatest thing ever, right?
Yeah.
That's how hard they hit. But what is your, because I never experienced Mikell's. By the time I moved to New York, which was 96, Mikell's was long gone, right? It didn't exist anymore.
5 6 years. Yeah.
I followed a couple other bands around, and we're gonna get to that later, that sort of come out of the stuff aesthetic. Let me put it this way. Like, I followed Hiram's Trio around, I followed Toffee and the Pussycats, which was, straight out of stuff. But you were there. What did you hear in terms of everything, really? What was it that hooked you in, first of all?
Well, as I say, it. I mean, it was the feeling, the way that they played those songs. I mean, there were songs I'd heard. I recognized almost all the songs, right? They
Right.
were all just pop tunes,
Right.
hip tunes, nothing esoteric, right?
Right. Right.
They would play, there was a bossa they used to play, a meditation,
Oh,
like
wow.
stuff you would play at weddings,
Right.
and we did play weddings that
Yeah.
band,
Yeah.
I mean, it was lounge songs, lounge music,
Right.
but they completely had their own take on it, their own thing. Now, Cornell, a lot of the feel came out of, Cornell had been with King Curtis for a long time. So a lot of the feel came out of the way those songs were played with King Curtis's band.
Right.
Um, and and then Richard had, T had his own very, very specific feeling.
Right.
It was very specific. Charlie Brown was a sax player out of the King Curtis mold, and he did it for a while. This is before Eric Gale joined the band and they became Stuff. It was still called the Gordon Edwards Quintet, or the Encyclopedia of Soul.
Oh, wow.
And then Charlie left after a while. I think he started playing his own gig, and then George Young, great alto player, was doing it, and he was a little bit more beboppy, which is very interesting to me, because he was playing like real, at times, real bebop Charlie Parker lines over Gordon's feel,
Right.
which was really great to hear.
Right.
So
Right.
that was the first time I ever heard it put together. There's a lot of talk about when fusion started and bands, saying they're making a statement for the first time of putting jazz and rock together.
Yeah.
One of the first times I really heard it was George Young playing bebop over that R&B feel.
Right.
And it worked, you know, it
Right.
wasn't slapped together, it was organic, you know.
Right. Right.
So because there was a lot of that back then, of just, you know, guys who were jazz guys trying to make money doing pop music and didn't really know what pop music was. They had their own feel. I mean, they
Right.
had it all worked. I mean, they had been playing on a lot of record dates together.
Right.
The spaces in the music were defined by their own personalities.
Yeah.
Um, it was a very unique and specific thing, and
And
they could do it, you know, on any kind of tune. You know,
mm,
they didn't need an esoteric composition,
right.
you know, express what they did.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and you know, if you there's a video, stuff live at Montreux. Unfortunately, it only has Steve Gadd on it. Well, fortunate, unfortunate. Chris was a big part of making that band happen, um, and I should probably explain that.
Sure. Sure. Sure.
But that live at Montreux is really what they sounded like at the club, you know, because
Mm.
they did all the covers there. All
Well, I
right.
mean, the fascinating thing is, you know, the material that they chose, of course, made it very, very approachable, right? That,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
no doubt. You walk off the street and you're hearing songs that you already heard on the radio. You're
right.
in it, you know. You don't have to necessarily pay attention or anything. It can be background music, but then at the same time, the
Yeah,
feel is so strong that you kind of get involved. You
yeah.
can't help but get involved. Go ahead.
I want to put in one more thing that you know, they talk about now they have jam bands, and I was a big fan of the Grateful Dead back, you know, in the early days, and I liked things stretched out, and that was another thing that they did that
Mm,
no one else was doing. Like
mm,
they jammed, you know,
right,
they would just sit on a chord or a vamp, 2 3 chord vamp for a long time and just jam and just listen and play. I mean, it felt great. So you didn't have to do a lot. It wasn't
right.
like very verbose soloing, although on the sax, I guess it was. But they stretched things out. They used to call it the blow,
Mm.
but but they sat for a long time, you know. So that was the jazz part of it, the jam band part. We didn't call them jam bands back then,
Right,
but
right.
they sat on things for a long time. There was a lot of listening. There was a lot of dynamics.
Mm.
It wasn't always really quiet, but it never got that loud because you couldn't. It was a, you know, real piano at Mikell's, you know,
Oh,
and
wow.
oh yeah, this was before there was any kind of sampled piano or anything like that.
But didn't they have like microphones or PA
Yeah,
or any?
but the sound system wasn't. No, no, no,
Okay,
no.
okay, okay,
They had to play pretty quiet, you know, to
okay.
really hear the piano. A lot of times you couldn't hear the piano. I think Richard, at some point, he had this monitor. I don't know how early he got it, but that must have. A lot of times I didn't know how he was doing it. Maybe
Right,
Paul Schaefer would know because he would sit right in front of
right, right, right.
him.
Now let's just jump back for a second because we got now the Encyclopedia of Soul, right?
Right,
And then the saxophone players leave and
right.
Eric Gale joins the fray, right? At this point, do they already have two drummers?
No, what happened is that well, Chris was playing with the Brecker brothers. They were
Okay.
like pretty successful now. This was like 75 touring. Chris sends in this guy, Steve Gadd. You know, this guy, there had been other drummers that had sat in occasionally that were good, but Chris really, it was his thing. It
Right.
was his thing. And the first guy that came in that could hang, and they didn't love him right away,
Mm,
was Steve Gadd.
mm.
But they used to do, I heard it through the grapevine really fast, like like that tempo.
Right.
And I remember like Ed came and he played it, and then he took a solo, and I was right in front of it. It was, you know, again, you know, it was like one of those, you know, life-changing moments.
Moments. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so then he started doing the gig, and then ultimately Gordon wanted both. I think when they got the record deal, they want Gordon said there were certain things he could do with Chris and certain things he could do with Steve, and he needed them both in the band.
Mm.
And then they played together. And you know, a lot of people thought that was the best way to hear the band. I kind of thought that having two drummers obscured what Gordon did a little.
That's interesting.
Because you know his time, and I'll be interested. I don't know if the drummers would feel that way. I don't think I ever asked Chris about this, but you know, his time thing is so strong that,
Right.
you know, when then you have two like great time players like Chris and Steve, you know, laying it down as well, I felt like Gordon's, you know, individuality got obscured a little bit. So it
I
wasn't
mean,
that much fun for me. Other times it was, you know, great. Sometimes it just felt like it was too much because everyone else played so much rhythm.
right, right, right. I mean, you do have like an interesting just combination of individual musicians, and all of them have, as you said, like a very, very specific take on how to comp, right? How to
Yeah.
play behind singers, how to play behind whatever, whoever is in the front, right? You have
Oh,
Richard T with his force. I mean, Paul Simon calls him the hands that build New York.
really?
Not for nothing, okay?
Oh, no, 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 no.
That's incredible already right there. Then you have Cornell, right? I mean, let's just very quickly go into the fact, or at least acknowledge the fact that Cornell is on every list of 100 best albums, right?
Yeah.
Cornell Dupree is on a couple of them.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I mean, let me just put this out there for the audience, because this needs to be, people need to wrap their brains around. It's the same guitar player who's on Donny Hathaway's Live at the Bitter End, and the same guitar player who's on Aretha Franklin's Live at the Fillmore West, and the same guitar player who's on King Curtis's Live at the Fillmore West. That's Cornell Dupree,
Yeah.
okay? And that's the same dude who played all those years ago, night after night at 97th and Columbus,
Yeah.
okay?
Oh, yeah.
So that's already like a real strong emphasis. Then you have Eric Gale, right? Um, what's the Paul Simon song? 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, right?
Is he on that one? I don't know.
That's Eric Gale on that one.
I
Okay,
mean, Dad made
that's,
such a strong statement on that song that everything else was, you know, I don't
I
know.
mean, that's really deep. Then you have Chris Parker, Brecker Brothers. I
Yeah.
mean, talk about trailblazer, right?
Oh,
Crazy strong player. And then on top of that, you have Steve Gadd, who is one of the, probably one of the most studied drummers out there right now. So you have all the, and on top of all of that, you have Gordon Edwards, kind of,
totally.
navigating this freight train that's
Yeah.
gonna come and roll over you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that all of these players were and are incredibly strong personalities, total individuals, and have a unique and original way of approaching comping, right? And they all kind of came together. So clearly they must have heard something in each other's playing. At least
Oh, yeah.
that's, you
Oh,
know,
they loved each other. I mean, they loved each other's playing.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm choosing my words very carefully.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they loved each other. But I don't know. I was not a party to most of the problems, but they did not get along well enough to keep going. And
Well, I mean, that's maybe I always kind of liken it to, uh, there's certain groups or certain environments that come up, right, and they kind of explode onto the scene. They make such a dent in our
yeah,
collective consciousness, in our collective aesthetic, because
yeah.
that group of musicians really influenced a lot of people, right? um and then, that also, since nothing stands still, I mean, nothing,
Nothing stands still, right?
Nothing stands still. The nature of the universe is that it changes.
Yeah.
So that particular environment, that particular group, that particular energy perhaps goes somewhere else, perhaps moves on, you know. I kind of see it like you have the various studio bands that came before stuff. You know, you have like the Bernard Purdy's and Chuck Rainey's, right? You have all of that. Then even before that, you have Bob Cranshaw and you know whoever the Grady Tate. Hello, you know, you have all of these combinations, and then you have stuff, right? And then after stuff, you have other combinations. You got Marcus Miller with Buddy Williams. You know, you got Buddy
Right.
Williams with Will Lee. You got
Oh,
all of these other Buddy Williams, Francisco Centeno. Like it kind of moves, right? So
yeah.
this all of these it is in move. That's the nature of what we do.
Yes, yes, that absolutely. And it was hard to tell that, at the time. You just think this is it,
Yeah,
don't ever change.
yeah, 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 yeah. Of
Like a
course,
love affair,
of course.
don't ever
No,
change.
that's totally. No, let me ask you something, because I mean, I'd love to talk to Gordon Edwards about that, but I also understand that that might be difficult. Nevertheless, what was for since I'm a bass player, you're a bass player, a lot of people watching are bass players. What was he using at the time?
Oh, he used a Fender Precision bass.
Right.
I'm trying to remember. I think originally, yes, he did have the pickup covers on. He
Mm-hmm.
played as many open strings as possible. He
Right.
never would like rare unless it was part of a run. Very, I remember that was something that really impressed me, and it's funny. I hadn't thought about this in a long time. Like he would never like play a D on an A string or an A on an E string. He always open strings,
Interesting.
always at the bottom of the neck.
Yeah.
Every once in a while he would play something, like hit like a G at the 12th fret or something for emphasis, but rarely out of first position.
Right, right,
Rare,
right. I remember seeing him play at Creole,
yeah.
um, and what also struck me was that his right hand was always between pickup and neck. It was rarely was it over the pickup, but it was fairly in the front of the instrument.
Yeah, yeah, he had a bad sound. Now, ultimately, a lot of the Cornell also they switched to Yamaha, and the bass
Right.
that Gordon has been playing for years is a Yamaha, and I think that has a J bass pickup in it
Okay.
at the bridge. And I'll tell you, I play that bass a lot, and it's a fantastic bass.
Mm.
I think it looks like like a Yamaha, not an expensive bass, but man, that
Yeah, yeah, I saw it. It's the BB three
black.
thousand, the
Yeah, I
black
don't
one.
know
Yeah, yeah.
the number, but it's great.
Mm. Mm-mm.
You
So
know, it's
back.
like when you're playing with a bunch of bass players and and people are sitting in, and you want, oh man, that guy sounds great. You pick up their axe to sit in, and you're halfway there.
Right, 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 right,
It's
right,
a
right.
halfway.
Yeah, this is not
Yeah, halfway.
exactly. I remember sitting in with you guys on Ron Jenkins's bass,
Oh yeah. Oh man, that's
the
pretty
place on the Upper West Side, right?
yeah,
And I mean, I had played on Ron's basses before,
jazz. Yeah,
many years,
yeah.
but then I never played on that jazz bass, and sure enough, like his strings were just almost dead on the fingerboard. It
He
sounds like,
really has a thing on that bass, man. He
but
really,
he sounds amazing. I mean, that's the thing. Like you would never believe that that sound was coming out of that
uh,
little space.
great for me.
So
I was playing guitar in that band, which I hardly ever do. So I got to play with a great bass player, which I love.
right, 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 right. So coming back to Gordon Edwards, so he's playing a precision. I take it that he had an amp there,
Yeah, B15.
B15 straight up.
Yeah,
That's it,
very
right?
quiet. Yeah, he would try to keep things as quiet as possible.
That's interesting because when you listen to the Stuff records, it doesn't sound quiet, and that's maybe one of the biggest takeaways. Like it sounds like they are digging in hard.
Well, you have to listen to the dynamics. Listen to Richard T. Like listen to like where he's playing, and then listen to some of his like stabs on the
Mm,
piano, and
mm,
you can tell like his accents are so much louder than his normal the normal force that he plays with.
Mm, mm, mm.
Um, so I mean, he had a great dynamic range, but no, they played pretty quietly. They had a crappy PA system, and a lot of times singers would sit in, and we have to. We can't talk about stuff without talking about Mikell's though. You can't.
Right.
We please. I don't know if this is the moment, but you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
to.
totally. Let's go back to Mikell's. Yeah.
Well, you know, Pat Mikell. It was run by a couple, Pat and Mike Mikell, and I didn't know Mike so well, but I got to know Pat, and I still speak to her. I tried to call her yesterday, but I didn't get in touch. Um, she was this, the gorgeous hostess, looked like Lauren Bacall or something,
Mm, mm.
and very sweet and gracious, and it was Pat and Mike that I gave them this gig that
Right.
a lot. I mean, there's a lot of bands in town,
Right.
and to say you get. I mean, now no one plays 5 nights a week anywhere,
That's
right?
true.
This is the end of that scene. Back in the 60s and 70s, in the 50s, your whole job could be a bass player at a hotel.
Right. Right.
You could be the bass player in the Hotel Pierre Orchestra, and that's like all you did.
Right.
That was
Right.
it. So I mean that they believed in this band to the point that, all right, you're here all the time.
Right.
That's huge. I
That
mean,
is huge. Yeah. 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 They must have. I mean, they must have heard something in the band.
yeah.
They must have, and they themselves must have been aficionados, lovers
Oh
of
yeah.
music.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? And then on the weekends, they would usually have jazz groups, at least sort of in the beginning. And I remember for a while, it was great. They had this group. It was Ray Brown, Milt Jackson, Mickey Roker, and Cedar Walton.
Wow.
I mean, there were weeks I would go to hear Gordon, and then on the weekend I would hear Ray Brown.
Right.
I should
I
be much
mean.
better than I am. So it was fantastic.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, there is a lot to be said for the regular, or I shouldn't call it regular. By the way, Gary Fritz is in the chat. He's saying hello.
Hello.
um,
An interview with him with Paul Adams' wife the other day.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So no, there's a lot to be said for these opportunities of having like a club, a hang where all of us, where the band can go in and perhaps stretch out, right?
Oh,
I mean, this
very much stretch out.
there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot for, and maybe. No, of course, I don't know whether they all got paid for playing, or or how much they got paid. But perhaps since there were not that many people in the club, it made it more possible for the band to kind of stretch out, and it wasn't really that much about the money anymore. It was about the joy of playing together and creating and being in the sound that they obviously heard.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't have been about money. I mean, for the first year or two, I remember like there was just so many nights it was either free to get in, or one night you go, there was $1. There was a really cool guy at the door named Tommy,
Mm.
and he passed away recently. And sometimes they charge you $1, $2, or nothing.
Right.
It was very
Right.
loose,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and then ultimately, after a couple of years, I guess probably towards the end of 75, the word really got around. And then when it really, they were doing records. So like people would be, Billy Joel would come and sing, Patty Austin, when she was still just a background singer, would sing. And then David Sanborn would play. I remember one night David Sanborn and Tom Scott were like kind of dueling it out. It was fantastic,
Incredible.
And so a lot of people would sit in that they did record dates with,
Right.
and so eventually it became when Joe Cocker like started really almost like being their regular singer,
Right. Right.
around middle of 76, beginning of 76. And then they had appeared on Saturday Night Live. I guess that must have helped a lot.
Oh yeah.
Then eventually got like really crowded. It
Yeah.
was really there were like lines around the block crowded.
Okay. Okay. So now we're in the middle of the 70s, right?
Now
We're
towards the later 70s, yeah.
Yeah, so we're mid to late
Yeah.
70s, and we're also sort of going into the whole disco era. Is that right?
Well, important because this is a big thing because people would like now would put down disco or whatever. Now to me disco was just those guys playing R&B with producers sweetening up the tracks.
Right.
All right, I mean you had a track like The Hustle, which is very saccharine, kind of annoying, but that's Gordon and Steve Gadd,
Right.
just playing the way they did in Mikell's, but with certain sweet things on top.
Right.
But a lot of the disco, especially disco that came out of New York,
Mm.
was just the R&B guys, with certain kinds of, songs. I mean, the big one, which is really great, which brings it all together, is that Native New Yorker song, which was
Mm.
a huge hit, has a lot of chord changes, has very much Gordon doing his thing, Richard T doing his thing, Michael Brecker doing his thing. Um, so that really sounded like stuff, even though it didn't have all the members of stuff. I don't think the guitar players did that right, but it was
Mm.
definitely Gordon and T, and they made a huge statement on the song. It was a big hit, very melodic song, but that the guy that wrote it, Sandy Linzer, was known for that. So
Gary Fritz is saying Odyssey.
Odyssey was the band, was the group. They tried to get it to Corey, who I was her musical director for a while, Corey Day, Dr. Buzz's Savannah band. They wanted, Sandy Linzer tried to get Corey to sing that as the follow-up to, their big hit.
Okay.
And they didn't want to take it,
Mm.
so
Mm.
they had to find it. What's their big hit that Dr.
What the
Buzz?
big hit? The big
Cherchez
hit?
La Femme. Cherchez La Femme. That was
Cherchez la femme. Okay.
the Savannah band, and then they wanted, I guess Sandy Linzer, the producer, wanted them to do that as a follow-up. They didn't take it, and they never had a real follow-up. And Odyssey had a huge hit with it.
Mm. Let me just chime in real quick. Two things that you said that I want to point out to the audience. And one thing is that you very, very graciously sent me yesterday a transcription
Yeah.
of that song. Now I forgot the title. You just
Native New Yorker.
Native New Yorker, right? So you sent me a transcription for everyone who's listening, who's watching this out there. That transcription is going to be on George's Space Chat. I just did not get around to put it up yet, to transfer the file and all of that. Nevertheless, that came directly from Frank. So big thank you to you for that. And the other thing is that what I find fascinating, and you kind of touched on it right now, that when now we're going towards the late 70s, perhaps going into the 80s, the band breaks up, like stuff doesn't exist anymore, or while stuff existed, not all of them are always together recording. Like some of them go off and record over here and some record over there. Gadd and Gordon Edwards record The Hustle, and then Richard T and Steve Gadd work over here with, and Gordon Edwards work with Paul Simon, right? Eric Gale is sometimes over here, he's sometimes over there. Cornell is all over the New York recording scene. And yet, when you listen to these albums, you unmistakably get that sound. You get the stuff sound. It just jumps out at you. You hear it. It doesn't matter whether it's Sounds and Stuff from Quincy Jones, right, which has Anthony Jackson on bass. I mean,
that was a funny story about that, but yeah.
There's a huge difference between Anthony Jackson and Gordon Edwards, right?
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it does sound to a certain degree like a Stuff album, right? Then you have The Wiz, right? Again, Anthony Jackson on bass and Gadd on drums, Richard T on keyboards, Eric Gale on guitar, and all of a sudden, and I shouldn't say all of a sudden, but and there you have again the stuff sound. You have 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover with Eric Gale on guitar and Steve Gadd on drums and Tony Levin on bass, and it still sounds like stuff.
Yeah.
So that I just wanted to point out, like this is an incredible feat that these guys or these musicians made happen, where for what they seemingly out of nowhere were able to recreate that pocket and recreate that sound, even when the rest of the band was not there, right? And that is fascinating to me. Like that, I don't know of anybody else who was able to do that. Really, I mean, even with Jameson, you hear Jameson playing, and then you hear him play in Los Angeles. I just recently learned like of a Bill Withers album where he's on one track, right? And it sounds awesome and he sounds great, but it's not Detroit. It doesn't sound like Detroit. Yet only a part of stuff made it was needed to make an album sound like stuff. Like, how did that happen? Like,
well, one thing just that you said it didn't sound like Detroit. You know, when recording techniques were not as evolved as they became in the late 70s, you know, the room had a lot more to do with the sound. So it's not going to sound like Detroit because that room, you know, that room had so much to do with the sound. So if it's not there with those guys there, I mean, yeah, if you took all those guys and put them in another room, it would sound very similar. But
right.
taking Jamerson, you know, take him out of that snake pit there, it's gonna, just for technical reasons.
That's gonna influence the sound, no doubt about that. Yeah. But I thought also like more of the musical output, meaning what they were playing, the rhythmic placements, their own personalities that came through, you know.
Well,
they were just so strong.
The Gadd, I thought that he developed, you know, I was able to hear a few feels and fills that he developed at Mikell's, like that. I hadn't heard him play on records before I heard him in Mikell's, and then I heard, you know, just certain rhythms, you know, that were in a lot of the Stuff songs that did become an important part of like a lot of disco and pop arrangements. He played on so much stuff, and then he would just sort of play, you know, what fit, you know, that had fit the night before at Mikell's, it would fit on this record date.
Right.
And, you know, you'd have like, you know, great other bass players like Will or Anthony, you know, would hear, you know, it's just certain very simple stuff, but specific stuff that Steve would play, and they had heard him play him at the club, so they would know, you know, if they were on the date and Gordon wasn't on the date, you know, they would know what to do. I mean, if you were there at Mikell's enough, you know, it almost felt like you were in the band because you knew what they were going to do, you know. I mean, that's how I was able to get myself in there, because I listened so much, you know. You know, you just knew all the moves.
Right. So, I mean, that kind of at least explains a lot of that. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense what you just said. They were hanging out.
Yeah.
They heard the band live.
A lot.
They knew a lot. And then they ended up in the studios with members of the band, and they knew exactly what these guys were going to do.
It was a small scene, you know.
Right.
It was a small.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, though.
You have to remember, like back then, you know, the people that we really love as players, you know, they established themselves at such a high level, and then, you know, there were 5 or 6 bass players. I was not one of them that played on a lot of the records in the 70s. You know, and when someone came in that was new, like Neil, Jason, and Marcus came in around the same time in the late 70s, it was huge, you know. But, you know, you had like Will, you had Gordon, Anthony, you know, Francisco. that's more than half the records right there that you would ever
Mm,
hear in New York City. It's like,
crazy,
how many
crazy.
bass players are there?
Yeah. No, that's incredible. That is incredible. Now, there's no doubt that it was a very obviously a very very special time. This there's also no doubt about that particular time and that particular period doesn't it's over. It doesn't exist anymore. Something else has taken the place of it. I'm not saying that it's over in terms of I'm lamenting the fact that it's not there anymore. I like very much where I am in the presence. I like that too much, to be honest, to really lament that, oh my God, it's 20, 30 years too late. That's not me, and that's not how I think, right? I think something else has taken over, and the scene evolves, the scene moves. Nothing, as I said, nothing stays the same. The nature of the universe is change, and that's just what it is. Nevertheless, there was one thing that I wanted to before because we're already on like a little over an hour now. Um, One thing that I wanted to point out to the audience, and you're a good source for that sort of information, because the band split up into various other bands, right? I know that when I arrived in New York, I followed Hiram's trio around, right? Which, granted, Hiram was never in stuff, but he was familiar with those musicians very well. Will knew all of those musicians. Clint the Gannon knew all of those musicians very well. But then the other band that I followed almost religiously, or yeah, pretty much everywhere, was Toffee and the Pussycats, and that was Chris Parker's band. And I wanted to ask you, like, what were the bands that stuff kind of split up into? Because then you have Gordon Edwards, who's also
Oh, yeah.
still active. But also, before we get into that, let me just say that when hearing Toffee and the Pussycats, right? Chris Parker, Will Lee, Clifford Carter, Ralph McDonald, I'll never forget, they were playing. I'm pretty sure it was just the two of us, right? And Clifford Carter, has his own sound on the keyboards, but then he also knows how to play that Richard T pocket really well, right? So he did that, and then of course they had the composer Ralph McDonald playing percussion, right? And for the first time, I think, in my life, and this was now, going back to 96, somewhere between 96 and 98, right? I heard the song the way it was supposed to sound. It was that strong. There was just no doubt about that. Like, and that again was part of the stuff sound, right? That was part of that aesthetic, I guess. But go ahead.
What do you mean the song? You mean a song, a particular song,
No,
or
they were playing just the two of us.
oh, just the two? Oh, I thought you said me and you were hanging out or something like that.
That's that
All right.
it
Oh,
is
okay.
entirely possible.
Me and you were at a club hanging out. I was trying to think like, oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Look, I heard them. I remember hearing them one night at. I always forget Ashford and Simpson's Club on 72nd Street.
Oh, the
Sugar
Sugar
Bar.
Bar. Yeah.
And it was like as great as any night at Mikell's. I mean, Chris. I have to say, Chris Parker, Chris and Gordon had something that, when it was at its top, was
Yeah.
totally unique. And he has that with Will too. And I remember that night, him and Will were just, I mean, going to a place that I had never really heard a bass player and drummer go to, as far as creating spaces together.
Right.
And yeah, and then Ralph, I remember one night I was playing with Chris and Ralph was just there, and yeah, I mean, that Toffee and the Pussycats they had some really great nights. And also, well, all right, so go back a second. Uh, Talking about the bands that came out of stuff. First of all, Chris had a band. It was almost the same band before Toffee and the Pussycats, called Joe Cool. I
Oh.
I mean, I guess it was Chris and Will. I think Rob Mounsey. Oh, maybe it wasn't the same people. It was Rob
Mm.
Mounsey, maybe, and I don't
Yeah,
remember.
I wouldn't know that
All right, yeah,
them
they
I
were
never
a
heard.
classical band. I mean, they had CDs or whatever they played in Japan and stuff like that. But what
Mm.
happened is basically is that in the early '80s, stuff split into three bands. You know, Gordon had his own band called Stuff Two,
Okay.
with great drummer Mike Clark and then Mick Gaffney on guitar, who still plays with him, and sometimes well, and they would have singers. He always liked the singer thing more. He had Beverly Crosby, who's still with him, the
Mm-hmm.
great Gail Winters, who was a wonderful singer. She's back in Kentucky now.
Mm.
And there was a guy, rest in peace, Tom Bridwell, a really good piano player, quite
Mm.
a character. Uh, and that was Gordon's band, and they played very regularly at Kenny's Castaways, right?
Okay.
I guess even in the '80s. And then, you know, Gad, I guess towards maybe, you know, also like as far as keeping the band together. I mean, Gad, especially Gad and T, were doing so many dates towards
Right.
the end of the '70s, like the Bee Gees dates and all that stuff. I mean, they couldn't do, and they weren't in New York a lot. They were
Right.
flying all around, you know, L.A. and Miami and wherever else, touring, you know,
Touring and recording. That's I mean
and
they.
recording. But when they were out with Paul Simon, they were just out. You
Yeah.
know, Paul was huge, and I'm sure could pay a lot of money. You
Right. Right.
know, then all right. So Cornell's in L.A. He starts a band in L.A. with I don't know who else. I know that a friend of mine, a great sax player named David Woodford. You see him on Facebook sometimes. Was playing with them, and then I guess at some point he moves back to New York, '83 or something, and he starts a new band, and he puts
Mm.
this band together called Who It Is. And their first gigs, I guess, were with, it was T. It was T and Cornell, and he had David Sanborn,
Mm.
I think Steve Gadd and Will Lee. I think that was, and then Weckel started doing it, and then that group changed around a lot in the '80s, and different guys did it. Stanley Banks played bass a lot. And yeah, and then the Gad Gang was still happening. He had Eddie Gomez and
Right.
Ron Huber. So it was quintets, right?
Right.
It
Right.
came with Who It Is, quintet. And then eventually, one night I asked if I could play. He called me the next week, and then I ended up being bass player. And and it was Chris Parker, Lou Marini, and Cornell and Richard. So that was like the three bands like in the late '80s that were around a
Right.
lot.
Right.
Who It Is, the Gad Gang, and Stuff Too. And
Right.
then Chris was with Bob Dylan, and Buddy Williams started doing the gig a lot.
No, right, 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 right. And then, later on, Toffee and the Pussycat. First of all, Joe
Right.
Cool
And then
came around, and then Toffee and the Pussycat started, and perhaps are still active. I went with John Putnam after while we were doing Memphis. We went to the Iridium, and we saw you guys with Cornell, with Buddy Williams on drums. You were playing bass, and Ronnie Cuba was playing saxophone.
Oh yeah, that was 2010, and that was the last gig Cornell did in New York before he passed. And there's a video of that I've been trying to get, because there was one really good night, very crowded, and a great set, and that was Cornell's last great gig in New York.
Last big hurrah. Yeah, 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 yeah. No, there was definitely, I mean, with a player like him, it doesn't take a lot to realize, oh, that's Cornell Dupree playing guitar. Like there's a sound right there. There's a particular voicings that he uses. It's the same. Just for people who out there who want to get into it, like check out Al Jarreau. He did a live album in the '90s. Marcus Miller produced it. Gad is on it, and
Cornell is on. Eric Gale is on.
and Eric Gale. That's what I meant to say.
That's
Like
great. No, that's Marcus was really hitting it.
Eric Gale is on it, and the minute he starts playing, it's like, oh, that's Eric Gale. I didn't even know like that he would do a Al Jarreau date, but here he is. It's unmistakable. Like all of them have such strong personalities and such unique styles in their playing. It's unmistakable, really.
It was so inspirational. And
Yeah.
you know, in another way, I feel that, especially with T, that that legacy is lost a little bit because to pay to take something from it is almost imitating it. You know,
Right.
there's that line of like, and I had this, issue as I spoke to you when I was playing with them a lot. You want to, you know that it's working because you're imitating to a certain extent, but
Right.
how much is the whole thing, right?
Right. How much are you imitating, and how much are you putting of your own
Right.
personality into it? Yeah.
And
Because
how
you
much
don't.
do we really have to offer other than what's there already?
That's where it gets really tricky. I mean, especially with, and I totally agree with you there, especially with a player like Richard T,
Yeah,
because that his output is just so strong,
yeah,
unmistakable sound,
yeah,
unmistakable approach. All of this space that is being manipulated, because that's to a certain degree that's people say, like, as a musician you're manipulating space,
yeah,
manipulating
yeah,
time, space, groove, whatever. But
yeah.
he did it in a way that is just totally unique, totally unmistakably him, and so strong that it has made its way into our collective aesthetic. Like, if we
Yeah.
have, a definition of quality, a quality piano playing, Richard T is one of them.
It's huge. And you never hear someone say, "Oh, that guy sounds kind of like Richard T." Like you're either doing it
Or
or nothing
just
like it, and we did try to find people that could kind of do it. I remember it was kind of sad, but we did, after Richard passed, we did a stretch in Japan 3 weeks, and we had Jack McDuff on organ.
oh wow.
And you know, I honestly, I mean, my take on the gig was, I'm just making believe I can't hear T in the monitors, and I'm imagining what he's playing,
Yeah, of course,
which
of course.
happened a lot anyway. I had to
Yeah,
do that anyway.
yeah.
But because like McDuff was just not going there,
Well, McDuff was not T, period.
nothing like it.
Yeah,
But
that's,
I remember during that run, every set McDuff and Chris Parker would do a duo, and that
right.
was great. That's what McDuff got to do, his things. But let me tell you, traveling with Cornell and Jack McDuff for 3 weeks, there was some funny shit, man. Those guys were just hysterical.
I would imagine so. I would imagine so. Now, it's just, it's an incredible, incredible sort of picture of a time period, of a time. That whole scene that you kind of painted for me, in terms of the band playing 10 to 3 in the morning, and then staying, until the wee hours of the morning, and at 9 o'clock in the morning being back at the studio to record for whoever. I
Eagles in
mean,
the morning, record dates at night, and Mikell's late night.
there you go. I mean, that's the life, that's it. Of course, it depends on what your own perception of the life might be, but
There is, right.
for a lot of people, myself included, that's the life. That's what
Yeah,
we.
especially when you're young. I mean, even those guys were a little older than me, but they were, in their 30s, 20s, maybe even back there.
Right.
Cornell was in his early 30s. He was born, what, 42? So he would have been like 34, 35,
Incredible. So he must have been in his 20s when he did those recordings with Aretha, and
Yeah, he was born in 20. He was born in 42. Yeah, I mean, he started playing with King Curtis when he was 18,
jeez,
maybe
that's
7.
incredible. That's incredible. I mean, that's pretty deep. That's
With
pretty
Jimi
deep.
Hendrix, that
Right.
was,
Right.
so
Right. Right.
let's not forget, you know, Hendrix was in there. I always, myself, my vibe was more to listen to Cornell, but I want to say there's a track, Aretha's recording of "Oh No, Not My Baby," a song written by Carole King and Jerry Goffin.
Mm.
She recorded that on a record, and Cornell does the closest to Hendrix that I ever heard him. I listened to that "Oh No, Not My Baby" by Aretha Franklin.
Okay.
I was on the left side, and he's just playing like his Hendrix shit. It's great. It's really funny.
Unbelievable. Well, listen, Frank, I don't want to keep you too long. I don't want to keep you any longer. I want to say many, many thanks to you
Oh,
for.
you, man. I just like sitting here talking about stuff. And, we haven't even started, so whatever. I guess we have. We started. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. If you're interested in whatever.
Yeah, of course. Listen, we have like quite an audience out there. Because there I can see there are 14 people watching us live right now. 14, 15 watching us live, and take it from someone who usually speaks to 6, 7.
Oh.
That's a lot. Okay, that's
All right. Oh, well, wonderful. I mean, I'm sequestered here, so not totally, but you know.
yeah. I know you're over there on the West Coast. Taking care of it all. That's
Could be worse. Could be worse.
it could be a lot worse. Yeah. Listen, Frank, thank you so much.
All
Thank you
right.
so much for being here today.
So how do I sign? Just press the red button to sign
Oh,
off.
Buddy Williams says hello.
Buddy, ladies and gentlemen, Buddy
Buddy
Williams.
Williams, yes,
All right.
yes, is there with us. All right, yeah, just press the red button, and you'll
Okay.
be
All
on
right.
your way.
Signing off. Take care.
All right, later, Frank.
Later.
All right, and for everyone out there watching, listening, I want to say thanks again for joining me today. Thanks once again to the great Frank Canino for giving us his insight on what stuff was and what it is. Check out this band stuff. It is to say that it's a powerhouse of a band is the understatement of the century, probably. And I meant every word I said earlier. When you're listening to stuff, it's you see the train coming, and you know it's gonna run right over you, and you are thrilled about it. And I guess I'm just gonna leave it there with you. All right, as I say every week, thanks so much for tuning in, for coming and spending a little bit over an hour with me. And I hope to see you all next week. And as I say, stay safe. Oh, be cool, be kind, and remember that we only have each other. All right. See you all next week. Later.